The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in the spring of 1874, tucked between a seed catalog and an overdue notice from the Territorial Land Office, and it changed everything Anna Mercer had ever planned for her life. She read it twice at her small kitchen table in Cincinnati, the morning light falling gray and familiar through the window she had looked out of for 26 years. The letter was from a man named Harold Fitch, the appointed superintendent of education for Coulter's Creek, a small settlement in the Wyoming Territory, and he wrote in a plain, desperate hand that their town had 31 children between the ages of 5 and 14 who had not seen the inside of a schoolroom in 2 years. The woman who had come before Anna had married a rancher 6 months after her arrival and moved north to Montana. Before her, the man who had attempted the job had been run off by a hard winter and harder men. Coulter's Creek needed a teacher badly enough that Mr. Fitch was offering a modest salary, a furnished room in the home of a widow named Mrs. Clara Holt, and the promise that the community would do everything in its power to make the arrangement work. Anna set the letter down and looked around the kitchen of the house where she had grown up, the house that had belonged to her parents, and then, after they passed within a year of each other, to her alone. The walls held her mother's embroidery and her father's pipe smell and every childhood memory she possessed. It was a good house. It was a safe house, and it was suffocating her. She had been teaching at the East Side Primary School for 3 years, and she was good at it, but there was nothing left in Cincinnati that surprised her. Every morning was the same trolley car, the same crowded classroom, the same polite conversations at church on Sunday. Anna had read every book she could find about the territories west of the Mississippi. She had read about the grasslands and the mountains, about rivers wide enough to swallow whole towns, about skies that stretched so far in every direction that a person could feel dizzy just looking up. She had spent 26 years being sensible and careful and contained, and somewhere deep inside her, something wild and hungry was pressing against her ribs like a caged bird. 3 days after the letter arrived, she wrote back to Harold Fitch and accepted. She spent the following 2 weeks in a state of organized terror. She sold the house to a young couple who had 3 children and needed the space. She packed 2 large trunks with clothing, books, teaching materials, a small framed portrait of her parents, and a good wool coat that the dry goods man on Walnut Street assured her would be necessary even in May in the Wyoming Territory. She said goodbye to her colleagues and to the children she had taught and to the reverend at her church, who prayed over her with great seriousness and told her the frontier was rough ground for a young woman alone. Anna thanked him for his concern and finished her packing. She took the train west from Cincinnati on a bright morning in late April, changing lines twice before reaching Cheyenne, where she boarded a stage that carried her north and west into the mountains. The journey took 11 days in total, and by the time the stage rolled into Coulter's Creek, Anna Mercer was covered in trail dust, stiff in every joint, and more awake than she had felt in years. Coulter's Creek was smaller than she had imagined. It sat in a high valley in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains, surrounded on 3 sides by pine-dark ridgelines, and cut through the middle by a shallow creek that ran cold and clear, even in late spring. There was a main street with a general store, a livery, a saloon that doubled as the town's gathering place, a blacksmith's shop, a small church that also served as a meeting hall, and a collection of homes and outbuildings that sprawled away from the main street in no particular order. The mountains rose behind it all, enormous and indifferent, still carrying snow on their upper shoulders even though the valley floor was green. Harold Fitch met her at the stage stop. He was a nervous little man in his 50s, with a thin mustache and ink-stained fingers, and he pumped her hand with such obvious relief that Anna almost laughed. "Miss Mercer," he said, "I cannot express to you the gratitude of this community. We have been waiting a very long time for someone of your caliber." "You haven't seen my caliber yet, Mr. Fitch," Anna said pleasantly. "Give me a week." He showed her to Mrs. Clara Holt's house, a neat, sturdy structure on the east side of the creek with white curtains and a kitchen garden already showing green. Mrs. Holt was a widow of 60 with sharp eyes, quick opinions, and an extraordinary talent for baking bread. She showed Anna to a small room upstairs that had a writing desk, a washstand, a narrow bed, and a window that looked directly out at the mountains. Anna stood at that window for a long moment and felt the bird inside her chest go very quiet, as though it had finally found the sky it had been looking for. "You'll need heavier curtains come winter," Mrs. Holt said from the doorway. "But for now it does well enough." "It's perfect," Anna said, and meant it with her whole heart. The next morning, Harold Fitch took her to see the place where the children were currently being taught, which turned out to be the back half of the church, partitioned off by a curtain and furnished with mismatched benches and a single table that served as a desk. There were no proper slates for every child, no wall maps, no globe. The books that existed were a jumble of donated volumes in various states of decay. Anna stood in the middle of that makeshift space and took a slow breath and understood that she had her work cut out for her. "Mr. Fitch," she said carefully, "the children need a proper schoolhouse." Harold Fitch rubbed the back of his neck. "Miss Mercer, the town has been talking about building one for 3 years. We've got lumber pledged and a site cleared, but we've never been able to coordinate the effort. Men are busy with their own properties, and there's always something more urgent, and then we'll make it urgent," Anna said. "I'll start teaching in here for now, but I want a real schoolhouse built before winter." Fitch blinked at her. "Yes, Miss Mercer," he said, in the tone of a man who had just been told exactly what was going to happen and understood that arguing was not an option. She met the children on Thursday morning, all 31 of them ranging from small, wide-eyed 5-year-olds to a pair of 13-year-old boys who sat in the back with their arms crossed, and the expressions of people who had been told school was important without ever quite believing it. Anna looked at them all for a moment and then smiled, a real smile, the kind she meant. "My name is Miss Mercer," she said. "I have come a very long way to teach you, and I intend to be here for a long time, so we may as well get comfortable with each other. Who can tell me the name of the river that runs closest to this town?" A small girl in the front row raised her hand immediately. "Goose Creek, Miss Mercer." "And who can tell me where Goose Creek eventually goes?" Silence. The two boys in the back exchanged glances. "That," Anna said, pulling a rolled map from the canvas satchel she carried, "is exactly the kind of question I am here to answer. Now, let us begin." By the end of the first week, she had assessed every child's reading level, organized them into working groups, established a daily schedule, and written a detailed list of the supplies she needed. She had also, through the gentle but persistent application of charm and expectation, recruited 3 of the town's mothers to come in 2 afternoons a week to help with the younger children. And she had placed before the town council, through Harold Fitch, a formal written request that the construction of a proper schoolhouse begin immediately. The council met in the saloon on a Friday evening, and Anna sat in the back and listened to them discuss the matter with the particular combination of goodwill and inertia that characterized committees everywhere. They wanted to do it. They simply could not organize themselves into doing it. She was beginning to think she would have to go find a hammer and do it herself when the door opened, and a man walked in that she had not seen before. He had to duck his head slightly to clear the door frame, which told her something about his height before she had finished turning to look at him. He was tall, very tall, with shoulders that belonged to a man who had spent years hauling weight that most people could not lift. He wore buckskin trousers and a heavy flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow despite the cool evening air, and his forearms were roped with muscle in a way that made Anna very deliberately look somewhere else. His hair was dark brown and long enough to brush the back of his collar, slightly unkempt in the way of a man who lived far from town and had more pressing concerns than his appearance. He had a strong jaw shaded with several days of beard, dark eyes that swept the room once with the automatic wariness of a man accustomed to reading spaces before he stepped fully into them, and the kind of general physical presence that made conversations pause when he entered. "Maddox," said Hezekiah Crane, the saloon keeper and de facto chairman of the council, with what sounded like genuine relief. "Good, you got my message. Sit down." The man Maddox pulled out a chair and folded himself into it. He nodded once at the room and then said nothing, which seemed to be his default mode. Harold Fitch leaned toward Anna and murmured, "Boone Maddox. He's a trapper and guide, lives up in the high country, comes to town maybe twice a month. He's got more practical skills than any 3 other men in the valley put together." Anna looked at Boone Maddox across the room and found, to her mild irritation, that he was already looking at her. He held her gaze for exactly 1 second and then looked back at Hezekiah Crane. Anna looked back at the front of the room as well and told herself she was not flushing. The discussion resumed, and it quickly became apparent that the council had sent for Boone Maddox because they needed someone who actually knew how to build something. He had, according to Crane, constructed his own cabin up in the mountains, and it had been standing for 6 years and had not collapsed under any of the winters the territory had thrown at it. If anyone could oversee the construction of a schoolhouse, it was him. "I'll pay for it myself in time," Anna heard Boone Maddox say. His voice was low and quiet, with a roughness to it that was not unfriendly. "I don't need wages. But if the town's pledging lumber, I need it cut and ready, and I need 3 or 4 men willing to work Saturdays until it's done. No one who's going to stand around talking about doing it." "The site's already cleared," Harold Fitch said eagerly. "I know the site. I'll look at it tomorrow and come back with what I need." Boone glanced once more toward the back of the room, not quite at Anna, and then stood. "Meeting done." "Meeting done," Crane agreed. Boone Maddox walked out of the saloon without a word to anyone else, and the meeting dissolved in his wake with a strange sense of resolution, as though his brief presence had accomplished in 10 minutes what an hour of discussion had not managed. Anna walked back to Mrs. Holt's in the mild evening, listening to the creek and the frogs and the distant sound of something moving in the tree line above town, and thought that Coulter's Creek was turning out to be considerably more interesting than she had expected. She met Boone Maddox properly the next morning, which was a Saturday, when she went to inspect the cleared site where the schoolhouse was to be built. It was a good location, a flat piece of ground on the north side of the creek, sheltered from the worst of the western wind by a stand of ponderosa pine, with a clear southern exposure that would bring good light through windows. She was standing in the middle of it, turning slowly to get a sense of the dimensions, when she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find him approaching from the tree line with a coil of measuring rope over one shoulder. "Miss Mercer," he said. He stopped at what she recognized as deliberate, respectful distance. "Mr. Maddox," she said, "I was just trying to imagine where the windows should go." He looked at her for a moment, a direct, considering look, not rude but not shy either, and then looked at the site. "South face," he said. "You want the light coming from the south. Morning sun in winter is low enough that east windows would just blind the children anyway." "That was my thought exactly," Anna said. He glanced at her again with something that might have been mild surprise. "You've thought about building before. I've thought about teaching. You think about everything that gets in the way of it." She paused. "How long will it take to build?" Boone set down the coil of rope and began to pace the perimeter of the site with the focused efficiency of a man who had done this kind of calculation many times. "Depends on the weather and whether the men Crane promised me can actually follow a direction. Best case, 6 weeks. If I hit trouble, 8. 8 puts us in the middle of summer," Anna said. "The children will be out of school by then." "Which is why I'm planning for 6, he said without looking up from where he was pacing. "I'd like them to be able to start the fall term in their own building." The simple, unadorned intention in his voice surprised her. She had expected a man doing a job. She had not expected a man who was thinking about the children. "Mr. Maddox," she said, "thank you for agreeing to do this." He looked up at that. His dark eyes were level and steady. "I've got a nephew in your class," he said. "Name's Eli Crane. He's 8 years old and sharp as a tack, and he's been doing his lessons in a church curtained off from Sunday hymnals for 2 years. He deserves a proper building." Anna made a mental note about Eli Crane, who she already knew was the bright, dark-eyed 8-year-old who sat in the second row and asked questions that consistently outpaced his age. She filed away the information that Boone Maddox was Hezekiah Crane's brother-in-law, which made him part of the town's fabric in a way that his mountain solitude might have obscured. "He deserves it," she agreed. "They all do." Boone Maddox nodded once, which she was beginning to understand was his version of agreement, and went back to his measuring. She came back several times over the following days because she could not help it. She told herself she was monitoring the project's progress, which was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that watching Boone Maddox work was unlike watching anyone she had ever watched work before. He arrived at the site before dawn and was still there after dark, working by the light of a lantern when the day gave out. When the lumber arrived, he ran his hands over every board before he used it, checking for flaws with a thoroughness that looked almost like tenderness. When the 3 men Crane had promised showed up on the first Saturday, Boone directed them with a minimum of words and a maximum of clarity, and they moved around each other with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed team. Anna began to bring coffee. It was a practical gesture, she told herself, because the mornings were still cold and the men were working hard and Mrs. Holt had coffee enough to spare. She would bring a pot and tin cups and set them on the stump that served as a makeshift table near the worksite, and more often than not Boone was the last to take a cup and the first to return it, washed clean at the creek. He was not much of a talker. She had established that early. But when he did speak, it was worth listening to because he did not waste words. One morning she arrived to find him standing back from the framed walls, arms crossed, studying them with the same focused expression she had come to associate with his best thinking, and she stood beside him and looked at the frame and said, "What are you seeing?" "The door," he said. "It needs to swing out, not in. In a fire, if everyone's running for the door at the same time, it'll jam if it opens inward." Anna stared at the framed doorway and felt a cold ripple of thought. "I never would have considered that." "You'd have considered it the moment it mattered," he said. "I'd rather consider it now." She looked at him then, at the profile of a man who was spending his own time and energy to think about children he was not directly responsible for, and something in her chest moved in a way she did not immediately know what to do with. "You could be up in the mountains," she said. "You clearly prefer it there. Why are you here doing this?" Boone was quiet for a long moment. He picked up his hammer, turned it in his hands once, set it down. "The mountains'll be there in August," he said. "Eli won't be 8 for very long." She thought about that for the rest of the day. The children, meanwhile, were thriving. Anna had the gift that all truly exceptional teachers possessed, which was the ability to make any child feel simultaneously seen and challenged. She had the older students helping the younger ones read, which gave the older ones a sense of purpose and gave the younger ones more attention than she could manage alone. She had brought from Cincinnati a set of arithmetic flashcards that she had made herself, and she turned drills into competitions that had even the reluctant 13-year-olds leaning forward in their seats. She told the children stories, real stories from history and geography, with enough drama that even the back row paid attention. Eli Crane was everything Boone had said. He was small for his age, with the same dark eyes as his uncle, and he had the particular quality of mind that asked the second question before most people had finished answering the first. He came to her after class one afternoon with a book he had found in the church storeroom, a battered copy of a natural history guide, and asked her to read him the chapter on mountain lions. "Do you want to be a naturalist when you grow up, Eli?" she asked. He considered this with great seriousness. "Uncle Boone says they're called mountain lions, but their real name is puma," he said. "He knows things like that." "He's right," Anna said. "Their scientific name is puma concolor." That means they're all one color. They're also called cougars. Eli's eyes went wide. Can I write that down? You should always write things down when you learn them, she said, and handed him a piece of paper. He came back the next day and the day after that, and she began to understand that Eli Crane was not just bright but lonely in the way of a child who had run out of questions that the adults around him could answer. His mother, Boone's sister, had died of fever 2 winters earlier. His father, Hezekiah Crane, was a good man who worked long hours and loved his son, but was not, in Anna's gentle assessment, a man who read natural history guides. Eli was being cared for. He was not being fed. She mentioned this to Boone one evening when he was washing his hands at the creek after a long day of work, the last of the evening light turning the water copper. She had brought the last of the coffee and poured him a cup and told him about the natural history guide and the mountain lions. Boone dried his hands on his trousers and accepted the coffee and was quiet for a moment. He asked me last winter why bears hibernate, he said. I told him it was something to do with the cold and the food, but I didn't know the real reason. The real reason is complex and fascinating, Anna said, and he's ready for the real reason. He's more than ready. Boone looked at her over the rim of the tin cup. The light was going soft and golden, and it caught the angles of his face in a way that made her press her lips together and look at the creek. You're good with him, he said. He's easy to be good with. Not everyone thinks so. A pause. He bit a man last spring. Anna laughed, a sudden, genuine laugh that startled them both. Boone's mouth curved at the corner just barely, but it was unmistakable. He was defending Mrs. Patterson's chicken, Eli's uncle added. I support that decision entirely, Anna said. The curve at the corner of Boone's mouth deepened, and it occurred to Anna that a full smile from this man would be something worth seeing. The schoolhouse rose through May and into June. The walls went up and then the roof, a pitched structure that would shed snow efficiently, which was Boone's primary concern for anything that had to survive a Wyoming winter. He cut the windows himself from good pine and fitted them with glass that had been freighted up from Cheyenne at considerable expense. Expense he paid from his own savings without making any show of it. Anna found this out from Harold Fitch and felt something sharp and warm settle in her chest. The men of the town had taken to the project with more enthusiasm than she had expected, possibly because Boone Maddox's focused energy was contagious. There was a particular quality to the way he worked that made other people want to match it, not out of competition, but out of something more like respect. He never asked anyone to do something he had not already done himself, and he never stood watching when he could be helping. The building grew steadily, solidly, in a way that felt less like construction and more like something inevitable. Anna spent her evenings planning lessons and writing letters, home letters that described the mountains and the creek, and the children with the excitement of a woman who has found something she did not know she was looking for. She described Coulter's Creek with such warmth that Mrs. Patterson, her former colleague in Cincinnati, wrote back to say, she sounded like a woman in love with a place. Anna read that line twice and then put the letter in her desk drawer and went to look out her window at the mountains. One evening in mid-June, a group of men arrived in Coulter's Creek from the west, rough-looking men on horses that had been pushed hard. They went to the saloon and drank heavily and became loud, and by 9 o'clock they were making the kind of trouble that made the women on the main street walk faster past the saloon windows. Anna was coming back from the church. She had stayed late preparing materials, and she had to cross in front of the saloon to reach the bridge over the creek. She had almost made it when one of the men came out of the saloon door and stepped into her path. He was broad and sunburned and smelled strongly of whiskey, and he put his hand on her arm and said something she did not want to remember afterward. She was drawing breath to respond when a hand the size of a dinner plate came from somewhere behind her right shoulder and closed around the man's wrist with a grip that produced an audible creak of protest from the man's joints. Boone Maddox stepped forward and around Anna in a single motion that placed him between her and the man, and he was half a head taller and twice as wide, and radiating the particular quiet danger of a man who has not raised his voice, because he has not needed to. "Let's not," Boone said. The man looked up at him and appeared to be doing rapid calculations about his chances. The calculations seemed to produce an unfavorable result. He stepped back. Boone did not move until the man had gone back inside, and then he turned to Anna. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was level, but his jaw was tight. "I am now," Anna said. Her heart was going fast, but she kept her voice even. "Thank you." "I'll walk you to Mrs. Holt's," he said. It was not phrased as a question. They walked in silence across the bridge and along the east path, and Anna was intensely aware of him beside her, the warmth of him, the size of him, the controlled attention with which he watched the shadows. He walked with the assurance of a man who had learned, in places wilder than this street, how to know when something was coming. At Mrs. Holt's door he stopped, and Anna turned to face him. The night was cool and the creek was loud, and the stars above the mountains were extraordinary in the way that western stars were extraordinary, thick and close and serious. "You should not walk alone after dark," he said. "I've been walking alone after dark in cities considerably larger and rougher than this one," Anna said, but without any real edge. "This isn't Cincinnati," he said. He paused. "I've never been to Cincinnati." "It has its dangers too," she said, "just different ones." He considered this with the serious attention he gave everything. "Fair enough," he said, and then after a moment, "Good night, Miss Mercer." "Good night, Mr. Maddox." She went inside and stood in the hallway listening to his boots recede on the path, and Mrs. Holt appeared at the kitchen door with her knowing eyes and a cup of chamomile tea, and did not say a single thing that was not about the chamomile. They began to talk more after that. It happened gradually, the way the best things always do, building from small conversations to longer ones with the naturalness of water finding its level. She would arrive at the schoolhouse site with coffee and stay longer than the coffee required. He would find reasons to stop by the church in the evening, ostensibly to look at the space and remind himself of the measurements, but they both understood after the second time that the measurements had not changed. She learned things about him in pieces, the way you learn things about a person who does not organize his history into easy stories. His family was from Kentucky originally. His father had been a trapper and his father's father before him, and Boone had grown up learning the mountains the way other children learned their neighborhood streets. He had come to Wyoming at 19 with a man named Garrett Cole, who had taught him every practical skill he possessed, and who had died of a fall in the winter of 1869. Boone had been 24 then, and he had buried Garrett Cole himself on a ridge above the valley and built a cairn and stayed there for 3 days, which he described without drama as one of the harder things he had done. He had never married. He offered this information one afternoon with the same matter-of-fact plainness he gave everything, and Anna did not ask why, because she thought she understood. A man like Boone Maddox did not love things lightly or often, and the things he loved, the mountains, the work, the small fierce boy who asked about pumas, he loved with a depth and permanence that was perhaps not easy to match. She told him about her parents, who had both been schoolteachers, and about growing up in a house full of books and careful thinking, and the particular kind of love that expressed itself through education. She told him about the caged bird feeling and the letter from Harold Fitch, and the morning she had decided to come west. He listened to all of it with his full attention, which was the kind of attention that made you want to keep talking, not because he responded enthusiastically, but because he was genuinely there, genuinely present in a way that was rare. "Were you scared?" he asked. "When you decided to come?" "Terrified," she said, "and absolutely certain." He looked at her for a moment. "That's the best way to do anything," he said. Summer settled into the valley, warm and long-shadowed and smelling of pine and creek water and new lumber. The schoolhouse walls were complete and the roof was on, and the interior work had begun, the plank floor going down board by board. The windows hung. The great stone fireplace at the north end, built by a man named Amos Whitby, who was the best stonemason in the valley, and who did the work in exchange for Boone helping him mend a fence line that ran for 3 miles across the western pasture. Anna found the economy of frontier life, the way skills became currency, the way neighbors were both more necessary and more valued than in cities, genuinely beautiful. She commissioned a reading shelf to be built along the east wall, and Boone built it himself, which she had not asked for but which he did anyway, cutting the pine with the same hands that had felled the trees from which it came. He brought her to see it on a Wednesday afternoon when the light was good, and she ran her hand along the smooth edge of the shelf and felt something that she recognized with a clarity that surprised her as love. Not love for the shelf. Love for the man who had built it, who had looked at the plans she drew up in her careful teacher's hand, and added a small decorative edge along the top that served no structural purpose and was simply, quietly beautiful. She did not say it. She looked at the shelf and said, "It's perfect," and heard her own voice and knew it was carrying more than she intended, and saw the slight shift in his posture that told her he had heard it. They stood in the unfinished schoolhouse in the afternoon light, surrounded by sawdust and the smell of pine, and the quiet between them had a quality she had not experienced in a quiet before, a quality of fullness rather than absence. "Anna," he said. He used her first name for the first time, quietly, like a man who had been considering it for a while and had decided it was time. She looked at him. "I'd like to take you to see the valley from above the tree line," he said. "If you want that. There's a trail I know, it's not difficult. You can see 3 counties on a clear day." "I would want that very much," she said. They went on a Sunday, the one day she did not teach and he did not build. He brought 2 horses, a bay for himself and a gentle roan for her, and a pair of saddlebags with enough food and water for a day. He led her up a trail that climbed through pine forest, and then through aspen groves where the leaves shivered in the morning breeze, and then above the tree line onto a broad open shoulder of the mountain where the wind was cool and clean and the world fell away in every direction in a sweep of green and gold and distant blue that made Anna stop her horse and simply stare. "There," Boone said quietly. He was watching her, not the view. She was aware of him watching her. She let him watch. She turned slowly and looked at the mountains stacked one behind the other, at the valley far below with its thread of creek and its cluster of small buildings, at the sky so close above them it seemed like something you could press your palms against. "I understand you now," she said. "Do you? You live up here because down there everything is small. Up here everything is the right size." He was quiet for a moment. "I never thought of it that way," he said. "But that's right." They ate lunch on a flat rock above a small alpine meadow, where wildflowers were growing in a riotous disorder of purple and yellow and white. He knew the names of all of them, the common names and in several cases the proper ones, because Garrett Cole had taught him, and because a man who spent most of his time alone in wild country either learned to read it or became afraid of it, and Boone had never been afraid of it. Anna wrote the names down in the small notebook she carried everywhere. He watched her write and said, "Are you going to teach them this?" "Every word of it," she said. "Why learn about the world from a book when the world is right outside the door? That's not how most schools work. It's how mine will." He smiled then, the full smile she had been waiting for, and it was everything she had thought it would be, sudden and warm and transforming, changing his whole face from its usual careful restraint into something unguarded and bright. She felt it like sunlight. "I believe you," he said. They rode back down as the afternoon light went long and golden, and when the trail narrowed, he went ahead of her and she watched his broad shoulders and the easy way he sat the horse, and thought that she had ridden through mountains with a man who was more at home in them than anywhere else on earth, and that she had spent the most entirely satisfying day of her adult life, and that she was in a great deal of trouble. The schoolhouse was finished in the first week of July, a full week ahead of Boone's original estimate. It was a solid, handsome building, larger than any of them had expected it to become. Boone had added 10 feet to the original length after consulting with Anna about how many children might be enrolled in 5 years, a piece of thinking that struck her as both practical and quietly hopeful. It had 8 windows, 4 on the south face as planned, 2 on the east, and 2 small ones set high in the west wall to catch the afternoon light. The floor was level and smooth, and the fireplace drew perfectly, and the reading shelf along the east wall was beautiful. The town held a celebration that Saturday, a gathering in front of the new building that grew to include most of the valley's population. Mrs. Holt brought pie, which she did for any occasion large enough to merit it. Harold Fitch made a speech that went on considerably too long and was received with the affectionate patience of a community that had learned to let Fitch have his say. The children ran around the outside of the building with the proprietary excitement of people taking possession of something they had been waiting for, pressing their hands against the walls and running up the 2 front steps and back down again. Anna stood in the doorway of the new building and looked at all of it. She looked at the mountains behind the children and the creek glinting in the afternoon sun, and the people of Coulter's Creek gathered in their ordinary, extraordinary lives, and she felt such a surge of belonging that it frightened her with its intensity. She looked for Boone and found him at the edge of the group, slightly separate in the way he always was in gatherings, arms crossed, watching. When their eyes met, he did not look away, and she did not either, and Harold Fitch's voice receded into a pleasant, unintelligible hum, and there was only the afternoon light and 30 feet of open ground between them. She walked across that ground. "You built something extraordinary," she said when she reached him. "It's a solid building," he said, which was his version of accepting the compliment. "It's more than that. You thought about the children when you built it. You thought about the door and the light and the shelf and the extra space for the children who haven't arrived yet. That's not just carpentry." He looked at the building, then at her. "I had good specifications," he said. "Boone," she said. He looked at her. The full, direct look she had come to understand as his version of openness, of allowing himself to be seen. "Thank you," she said. "Really." "You're welcome," he said. "Really." They were very close. The crowd noise around them was cheerful and oblivious and completely irrelevant. "I'd like to see the valley in winter," Anna said. She had not planned to say it, but it came out with the certainty of something that had been true for a while. "I'd like to see it when the snow is on the mountains." He understood what she was saying. She could see that he understood it. "You're staying," he said. "I'm staying," she said. "Unless you can think of a reason I shouldn't." He looked at her for a long moment, and the corner of his mouth moved. "I cannot think of a single one," he said. They told no one anything, but everyone knew anyway, which is the particular feature of small communities that Anna was still adjusting to. Mrs. Holt was diplomatically silent on the subject for approximately 3 days, and then began setting an extra chair at her kitchen table on the evenings when Boone came to town. Eli Crane, who was 8 and had the sharp perception of someone who paid close attention to the adults in his life, simply appeared at Anna's side one day and announced, "Uncle Boone thinks you're the most interesting person in the valley." "That's very kind," Anna said. "He said it to my papa," Eli added. "He didn't know I was listening." Anna looked at this small, dark-eyed, extraordinary child and thought that the world was sometimes arranged with a wonderful, absurd precision. "Your uncle is the most interesting person I've met in a very long time," she told Eli. "But you're a close second." Eli considered this. "Because of the pumas?" he asked. "Partly because of the pumas," Anna agreed. The fall came on quickly, the way Wyoming falls do, with a sharpness in the air that arrived one morning in August and did not leave. The children moved into the new schoolhouse for the fall term with a ceremony that consisted entirely of them all sitting down at their new desks. Boone had built those 2 proper school desks with fold-up seats, hauled up from Cheyenne in pieces, and assembled over a weekend, and looking around at their new walls with the satisfied expressions of people who knew they had something worth having. Anna stood at the front of her own classroom, in her own schoolhouse, and looked at 31 children arranged on their chairs, and felt the bird in her chest stretch its wings in pure, uncomplicated joy. She taught them geography with the map unrolled across the south wall. She taught them arithmetic with practical problems. How many board feet of lumber in a schoolhouse of these dimensions, which pleased the children enormously because they could see the answer from where they sat. She taught them the history of the territory they lived in, the Crow and the Shoshone and the Arapaho who had lived in these mountains long before any settlers arrived, which she treated with the honesty and respect it deserved, and which provoked more serious discussion than anything else she taught, because some of these children were old enough to know people personally touched by that history, and the past was not past in the way it was in history books far away. One afternoon, a Shoshone man named Thomas arrived at the schoolhouse door. He was weathered and quiet, perhaps 60 years old, with patient eyes and the kind of dignity that required no announcement. He had heard from someone in the valley that the new teacher was telling the children the history of his people, and he wanted to know what she was telling them. Anna invited him in. She sat with him for an hour after school was done, and he told her things she did not know, corrections and additions and perspectives that no book in her trunk had contained. She wrote everything down. The following week she taught what he had told her, and she told the children where she had learned it, and she invited Thomas to come back and speak to the children directly, which he did, twice that fall and 3 times the following spring. Boone heard about this in the way he heard about most things that happened in the valley, which was sideways through other people and then confirmed by Anna herself, and he showed up at the schoolhouse one afternoon with a look she had come to recognize as the precursor to a real conversation. "Thomas came," he said. "He did. He corrected several things I was teaching, and I'm grateful for it." Boone was quiet for a moment. "Most people wouldn't have listened," he said. "Most people are afraid of finding out they're wrong," Anna said. "I've always found it useful. You can't fix what you don't know is broken." He looked at her in the way he sometimes looked at her, as though she had said something that confirmed something he had been thinking. "I know him," he said. "Thomas. I trade with his people sometimes in the high country. They know places in those mountains that no map has ever recorded." "Introduce me," Anna said. Boone's mouth did the thing it did. "All right," he said. September deepened and October arrived with its full colors, the aspen groves on the mountain flanks turning to gold and orange in a blaze that Anna sat and stared at from her schoolhouse window for long, guilty minutes during lessons she was supposed to be conducting. She took the children outside one afternoon and had them draw what they saw, not as an art lesson but as an observation exercise, and the results were so genuinely beautiful that she pinned them all to the schoolhouse wall and left them there for the rest of the year. The evenings were growing cold enough now that a fire was lit in Mrs. Holt's parlor, and it was becoming common for Boone to come to town on Friday evenings and have supper at Mrs. Holt's table, which Mrs. Holt continued to make no comment about with a conspicuousness that was itself a kind of commentary. They would sit afterward in the parlor while Mrs. Holt's knitting needles clicked in the corner and the fire settled, and they would talk about things that mattered to them: the children's progress, the winter preparations, the history Thomas had shared, the way the mountains looked at dawn from the ridge above the tree line. One Friday evening Boone arrived with a book, which was remarkable enough that Mrs. Holt actually looked up from her knitting. It was a well-worn copy of a natural history of the Rocky Mountain region, the kind of book that had been expensive when it was new and was now held together by care and habit. He put it on the table in front of Anna without any ceremony. "Eli can borrow it," he said, "if you think it's right for him." Anna picked up the book and opened it and saw immediately that it was Boone's book, annotated in the margins in his own hand with observations and additions, field notes from years of living in the country the book described. She turned the pages slowly, reading snatches of his notes, and felt the intimacy of it like something physical, the understanding that this was the book of a man's mind, of his attention and his learning, offered to an 8-year-old boy through the hands of the woman who was teaching him. "It's perfect for him," she said, "more than you know." "He can write in it too," Boone said, "if he wants to add things." Anna looked up at him. Mrs. Holt's knitting needles had gone very quiet. Boone, Anna said. Anna, he said. Mrs. Holt's knitting needles resumed with great purpose. I think, Anna said carefully, setting the book down on the table between them, that you are a considerably more remarkable person than you allow anyone to see. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the book rather than at her. I'm a man who traps and builds things, he said. That's not remarkable. It is the way you do it, she said. Everything you do as though it matters. The shelf, the door that opens outward, the extra 10 feet of schoolhouse in this book. You don't do things halfway. No, he said, I don't. Neither do I, she said. He looked at her then. The fire was low and the light was warm and Mrs. Holt had apparently found something in the far corner of the room very absorbing. Boone reached across the table and laid his hand over hers. His large, scarred, extraordinary hand, rough from 6 weeks of building and years of living in wild country. And Anna turned her hand over and felt his fingers close around hers, and thought that this was exactly what she had come west for, even though she had not known it when she boarded the train in Cincinnati. They sat that way for a long time, and no one in the room said anything, and the fire made its small, comfortable sounds, and outside the October wind moved through the pine trees with its low, familiar voice. November came, and with it the first real snow, which arrived on a Thursday night and was 2 feet deep on Friday morning. Anna stood at her window before dawn and looked at a world that had been entirely transformed. The mountains were white to their shoulders, the valley was white, the town was white and utterly quiet in the particular hush that deep snow produces, and every pine tree wore its burden of white with an unhurried patience. She broke trail to the schoolhouse through snow that came to her knees in places, which she found more exhilarating than difficult, and she had the fire going and the room warm before the first children arrived, red-cheeked and breathless, shaking snow from their coats. By 9 o'clock all but 4 of her 31 students were present, which she considered a considerable achievement for the first snow of the season, and she took the opportunity to teach them about weather systems and mountain snowfall, and the way the Bighorn Basin created its own climate, which led, naturally, to a discussion of animal tracks in the snow, and then to a brief but extremely popular lesson in tracking that had half the class outside in the snow, with Anna pointing to the evidence of a jackrabbit's path through the drift by the school steps. Boone came to town in the early afternoon, riding through the snow on his bay horse with the ease of a man for whom winter was simply a different version of everything he did already. He tied the horse at the store and was inside for perhaps 20 minutes and came out carrying a bundle that Anna, watching from the schoolhouse window, recognized as supplies he had not sent word about needing. He was checking on the town, she realized. He was making sure everyone was managing the first real snow of the season. He stopped at the schoolhouse on his way back out. She met him at the door and he looked at the room full of children and the fire burning well in the stone fireplace, and something in his expression settled. "You're all right," he said. "We're excellent," she said. "We've been learning about snow. It'll be deeper by next week," he said. "I'll make sure the wood pile's stocked." "You don't have to, I know," he said. She let him. It was not charity. It was the same thing it had always been, the practical, wholehearted engagement of a man who had decided that something mattered. Winter in Coulter's Creek was harder and more beautiful than anything Anna had encountered in her Ohio life. The cold arrived in earnest in December and stayed, a dry, clear cold that made the air crackle and turned every breath to vapor, and left the stars at night so bright and close that they seemed loud. The schoolhouse was warm because Boone had built it to be warm, the fireplace drawing well and the walls tight against the wind, and the children came every day through January and February through conditions that would have closed any school in Cincinnati. Anna had worried, coming from a city, that the frontier would wear her down. She found instead that it fed something in her. There was a clarity to a life in which the problems were real: finding enough wood, getting food through a hard winter, knowing your neighbors well enough to know who needed help, that the abstracted difficulties of city life had never given her. She was lean and strong and sunburned even in winter, and she slept the sleep of a person who has genuinely tired themselves during the day, and she woke every morning curious about what the day would bring. Boone spent the winter months doing what mountain men did in winter, trapping along the creek systems, tending lines that ran far up into the high country, coming to town every week with pelts for the trader in Cheyenne, and leaving with supplies for the next stretch alone. The rhythm of his life was ancient and particular, and Anna respected it, did not try to fill the weeks when he was in the mountains with demands on his time or his attention, because she understood intuitively that the mountains were not a rival to what was between them, but a part of who he was, and she was not the kind of woman who needed a man to diminish himself in order to love her. He came back from the mountains every week, however, and every week he came to Mrs. Holt's table and sat across from Anna in the firelight, and they talked, and whatever distance the week's solitude had built, the talking dissolved it, and the quiet between conversations was comfortable and inhabited rather than empty. He kissed her for the first time in January, which she would remember for the rest of her life. It was a Saturday evening after supper, and Mrs. Holt had retired early with what she cheerfully described as a headache, a fiction so transparent that Boone and Anna had not managed to look at each other for a full minute afterward without laughing. They were sitting by the fire with cups of tea, and some conversation had led them both to silence, and in the silence, Boone set down his cup and looked at her with the same focused, complete attention he gave to everything that genuinely mattered to him, and she held his look with the same. He moved to her side of the hearth and sat beside her, and it was so entirely natural and inevitable that she simply turned toward him, and his hand came up to the side of her face, careful and warm, and he kissed her with the same straightforward honesty with which he did everything, no hesitation and no performance, just the clear intention of a man who had made up his mind. She kissed him back with her whole heart. Outside, the snow was coming down soft and steady, and the mountains were invisible behind it, and the fire in the grate was the whole warm world. "I should have done that in October," he said when they had separated far enough to speak. "You should have done it in July," Anna said. He laughed, the real laugh, open and genuine, the one she had heard very few times. She pressed her palm against his chest and felt it. "Anna Mercer," he said. "Boone Maddox," she said. "I would like to marry you," he said, "if you're willing." She had not expected it quite so soon, though in retrospect she would think that waiting for it had been the only thing surprising about it, because there was no ambiguity in the man sitting beside her, and there never had been. He did not do things halfway. He did not love things halfway. "I'm willing," she said, "very willing." He kissed her again, and she felt the solidity of him, the realness of him, the absolute unambiguous presence of a man who had chosen her with the same certainty with which he had chosen every mountain he had climbed and every corner of the wilderness he had made his home. "I should ask your father," he said, pulling back slightly. "My father is dead," she said. "A beat, I'm sorry. He would have liked you," she said, with a certainty she felt fully. He was not a complicated man. He liked people who did what they said and said what they meant. "That I can do," Boone said. "I know," she said. They told Mrs. Holt the next morning, which surprised no one in the house or indeed in the town, and Harold Fitch, when informed, went so pink with satisfaction that Anna worried briefly for his health. Eli Crane, who was told by his father that his teacher was going to marry his uncle, went very still for a moment and then said, very carefully, as though testing the information, "Miss Mercer is going to be my family." "If that's all right with you," Boone told him. Eli thought about this for approximately 2 seconds. "She knows about pumas," he said, and that settled it. They were married in March at the end of winter in the little church that had housed the school before the schoolhouse was built. The Reverend James McAllister married them with a plain and honest ceremony that suited them both. Anna wore her best blue dress, and Boone wore the good shirt she had noticed he saved for town occasions, dark blue flannel, and he had trimmed his hair and his beard, and he looked, Anna thought, like something from a painting of the West that actually did the West justice. She walked to him down the short aisle with her own stride, unhurried and steady, and he waited for her with his hands clasped in front of him, and an expression on his face she had not seen before, something open and undefended and so perfectly happy that it stopped her breath for a half-second in the middle of the walk. She found it again, her breath, and kept walking and took his hands, and the Reverend said his words, and Anna Mercer became Anna Maddox on a cold, bright March morning while 31 children crowded the back pews with barely contained excitement. She kept her teaching, of course. That was never in question. She kept her teaching, and she moved, after the wedding, into Boone's cabin on the hillside above town, a solid 2-room structure that was well-built, warm, and surrounded by pines that whispered in the wind with a sound Anna learned to love the way she had learned to love everything in this country, completely and without reservation. Boone had already been thinking about additions. There was a framed-in space at the eastern end of the cabin that had been waiting for something, and they decided together what that something would be. Spring was the season of building again, the way the first spring had been. Boone extended the cabin by a 3rd room, which became Anna's study, with a south-facing window and a desk he built for her and a second reading shelf along the wall. Anna spent her evenings there writing lesson plans and letters, and increasingly, a journal that recorded the valley through the seasons with the precision of a woman who had loved the natural world all her life and was now living inside it. The school grew. 2 new families arrived in Coulter's Creek in the spring of 1875, bringing 5 more children, and then a homesteading family came in late summer with 4 more. And by the fall term, Anna had 39 students and was writing to Harold Fitch with the same firm inevitability. She had applied to the original schoolhouse about the need for a 2nd room, which the town agreed to, and which Boone built in the same summer that their first child came into the world. Their son was born on a bright August morning, a large, healthy boy who arrived into the world with a notable degree of volume that suggested he had opinions about things from the start. Boone sat beside Anna through the whole of it with his hand in hers, a presence so completely solid and steadying that the midwife, a capable woman named Ruth Graves, told him afterward that in 30 years of midwifery she had never seen a man sit that still and that useful at the same time. They named him James, after the Reverend who had married them, but within a week everyone in town was calling him Hawk because of the way he looked at things with the narrow, focused attention of a raptor, which was entirely Boone's quality translated into a round, pink, 8-pound person, and the name stuck before Anna even had a chance to object to it, which she didn't, because it fit. Eli was besotted with his cousin. He appeared at the cabin the day after the birth with a gift he had made himself, a small wooden carving of a puma that was not entirely anatomically accurate but was made with evident love and a seriousness of purpose that made Anna hold it for a long time after she opened it. "For the baby," Eli said, "so he knows about animals early." "He will know everything early," Anna said, "because his uncle is going to teach him." Eli's expression at this was quietly rapturous. Hawk grew the way mountain children grow, fast and strong, and with no patience for being inside when the outside was available. He walked at 10 months and was climbing things at 13. And by the time he was 2, he had a vocabulary that included the names of 12 birds and 3 kinds of trees, which Anna considered reasonable progress and Boone considered perfectly obvious because what else would a child raised in this valley learn first? She took Hawk to school with her in a board-based sling arrangement for the first months of his life, and the children were delighted by this, the older girls particularly, and Anna found that having a baby in the schoolroom had the unexpected effect of producing in even the most restless 13-year-old boys a peculiar, touching gentleness. The years moved through the valley with the same rhythm of the seasons, each one distinct, each one building on the last. In the winter of 1876, A bitter stretch in February collapsed the storage shed at the east end of the general store under the weight of 3 feet of compacted snow, and Boone organized the rebuild in 3 days, working in temperatures that kept most men inside. In the spring of that year, Thomas came back to the school with his granddaughter, a girl of 10 named Wren who had been learning English and who sat in the back of Anna's classroom with the same wide, absorbing attention that Eli had once shown and now showed more selectively, having become a teenager of considerable self-possession. Wren stayed through 2 full school terms, and the friendship that developed between her and a girl named Della Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's youngest, was one of the things Anna would point to in later years as an example of what a school was actually for. The 2 girls taught each other things that no curriculum could have provided. They quarreled and reconciled and quarreled again and wound up genuinely, permanently fond of each other in the way that children who have seen each other at their worst sometimes do. Anna facilitated this with careful hands-off precision, intervening only when it was truly necessary, understanding that some of the most important education happened in the moments she was not directly conducting. Anna discovered she was carrying their second child in the late summer of 1876 and told Boone on a Sunday evening on the front step of their cabin, in the last long light of the August sun. He sat very still for a moment, and then his arm came around her shoulders and he pressed his lips to her hair, and they sat quietly for a long time listening to Hawk play in the yard, chasing after a stick he had decided was a bear. "Are you well?" Boone asked. "I am very well," she said. "Good," he said. He held her a little tighter. "Good." Their daughter came in March of 1877, a calm, watchful baby with Boone's dark eyes and Anna's copper-brown hair, and they named her Clara after Mrs. Holt, who was deeply moved by this and celebrated by baking the largest pie she had ever produced, a construction so ambitious that it required 2 of the bigger serving plates and was consumed by approximately 1/3 of the town's population over the following 2 days. Mrs. Holt herself was not as spry as she had been in 1874, but she was still sharp and still present and still diplomatically silent about things she had strong opinions on, which Anna continued to find one of the most impressive skills she had ever encountered. She came to supper at the cabin twice a week, and Hawk called her Grandma Clara with an unconscious confidence that delighted her beyond her ability to conceal. Eli turned 13 in the spring that Clara was born, and he was growing into something that occasionally made Boone pause and look at him the way he sometimes looked at the mountains, with the quiet satisfaction of someone observing something good taking its right form. The boy who had bitten a man in defense of a chicken had become a young man of considerable intelligence and stronger principles, and his knowledge of the natural world, fed by 3 years of Anna's teaching and the annotated natural history guide, and many Saturdays accompanying his uncle on trails in the high country, was by now extensive enough that Thomas had told him, with the directness of a man who did not offer compliments lightly, that he had good eyes. Anna taught him everything she could, and when she had taught him everything she had, she found him more books. She wrote to a professor of natural history at a university in Philadelphia, whom she had corresponded with through her father's connections, and described Eli's knowledge and his observations, and the professor wrote back with 2 more books and several questions he wanted Eli to investigate. This correspondence, a 13-year-old mountain boy and a Philadelphia professor, became one of the quiet achievements Anna was most proud of, because it was the result of nothing more than believing that a person who wanted to know things deserved to have the means to know them. Hezekiah Crane, when told about the correspondence, stood in his saloon and rubbed his face with both hands and said, "My boy is writing letters to Philadelphia. He said it the way a man says something he cannot quite contain. He is writing very good letters," Anna told him. "The professor says his observations are precise." Hezekiah looked at her for a moment and then said, "His mother would have been so proud," and Anna put her hand briefly on his arm and said, "She would have been proud. She is." The school expanded again in 1877. The second room Boone had added to the building now fully utilized, and Anna was joined in teaching by a young woman named Josephine Hale, who arrived from Denver with a teaching certificate and a trunk full of music, and who turned out to be exactly the right person, because Anna had been wanting to add music to the curriculum since her first month in the valley and had not had the time to manage it alone. Josephine was 22 and cheerful and deeply capable, and within a month she had the children singing in two-part harmony, which made the schoolhouse audible from the creek on still days in a way that the whole town found pleasant. Boone and Anna gave a supper for Josephine in her first month, and around the table that evening, Anna looked at her husband, at the strong, quiet, particular man who had built the schoolhouse and the shelf and the desk and the study and the additions and the house that had become, somehow, exactly the house she would have built for herself if she had known what she needed, and felt the same thing she had felt the first time she had walked across those 30 feet toward him. Not quite the beginning of it now, but the grown version of it, the version that had been weathered and tested and had proven itself solid in all the ways that mattered. He caught her looking. His mouth did the thing it did. She smiled at him openly, without any management, and he reached under the table and took her hand. The third time Anna discovered she was carrying a child. It was the winter of 1878, and Hawk was 4 and Clara was not quite 2, and the cabin had long since become the warm, particular kind of chaos that only small children can produce. Boone took the news with the same steady presence he brought to everything, and built a third room off the back of the cabin that spring, which was becoming an annual tradition in a way that Anna found both practical and deeply funny. Their third child, a boy, arrived in September of 1878 and was named Garrett, after the man Boone had buried on a ridge above the valley in the winter of 1869. Boone held the baby for a long time after he was born, sitting in the chair by the fire while the cabin quieted around them, and Anna watched him from the bed and understood what he was holding. "He would have liked that," she said. Boone looked up. His eyes were bright in the firelight. "He would have liked all of this," he said. He looked at the room, at Hawk asleep on his small bed in the corner, at Clara in the cradle near the window, at Anna in the firelight. He always said the mountains were better with someone in them. He was right, Anna said. Boone looked back down at the baby named Garrett and held him with the practiced tenderness of a man who had found, in the middle of his life, that the things he thought belonged to other people, a family, a woman who saw him, children who would know his name, had been available to him all along. He just had not known where to look. And then a woman had come to teach the frontier children, and he had built her a schoolhouse and somewhere in the sawdust, and the morning coffee, and the 30 feet of open ground he had crossed toward her. He had found the whole of it. The schoolhouse stood on the north side of the creek through the seasons and the years, its 8 windows bright in the morning light, its stone fireplace warm through the long winters, its reading shelf full to the edge of what it could hold. Anna had written to every source she knew for books, had organized book drives and writing campaigns to publishers, and the collection on that shelf, which Boone had eventually extended by another section, and then another, was better than some schools in cities 3 times the size of Coulter's Creek. Josephine had added a music corner with a small organ that a family had donated, and a young man who had arrived from Missouri named Carter had taken over some of the arithmetic teaching, freeing Anna to spend more time on the history and literature and science that she found she did best. By 1880, the school had 44 enrolled students and a reputation that had spread far enough that a family had come from 2 valleys over specifically because they had heard about the quality of the teaching. Harold Fitch made a speech about this that was only moderately too long, and Anna sat through it with the good humor she had developed over the years for Harold's speeches, which were so genuinely well-intentioned that their length became a feature rather than a flaw. Eli Crane left Coulter's Creek in the spring of 1880 at the age of 15, young, but not impossibly young by frontier standards, to take up a position as a field assistant to the naturalist he had been corresponding with for 2 years. The Philadelphia professor having arranged for a collecting expedition through the Wyoming and Montana territories, and having written to Anna that he could not imagine making such a trip without the boy who knew those mountains better than his published guides did. Anna had read that letter 3 times and then sat Eli down at the schoolhouse desk and had a serious conversation with him about what this opportunity was and what it required. He sat very straight and listened with his father's dark eyes and his uncle's focused attention and then said, "I'll be back. This is my home." "I know," Anna said. "That's why you can go." She hugged him at the stage stop when he left, a long, genuine embrace, and he hugged her back with the slightly awkward intensity of a 15-year-old who had learned what it meant to be cared for and was not entirely sure how to carry it yet. Boone stood beside his brother-in-law and said nothing, but when Eli turned to him last before he climbed onto the stage, Boone put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Write when you can." "Every week," Eli said. "And watch the weather," Boone said. "The mountains in July are different from the mountains in August." "I know," Eli said, with the confidence of someone who had been learning this specific thing for 7 years. "You taught me." The stage rolled away north, and Boone and Hezekiah and Anna stood and watched it go until it was gone around the bend in the road. And then Boone put his arm around Anna's shoulders and they walked back toward the cabin, through the town that had grown around their years together, past the schoolhouse that had started everything. The mountains were bright above them in the spring light, still carrying their snow, permanent and enduring and patient in the way of things that have been in their place for a very long time. That evening, after Hawk and Clara and young Garrett had been put to bed, Hawk at 6 already asking, every night, for one more story, one more answer, one more piece of the world to take with him into sleep, Anna and Boone sat on the front step of the cabin in the last light as they had done 100 times, and the valley spread away below them green and alive, the creek catching the light, the town steady and established in its place. "I need to tell you something," Anna said. He looked at her with the full attention that had not diminished in the 6 years she had known him. "I think we're going to need another room," she said. The long, still pause, and then Boone Maddox, the quietest man in the valley, turned to her on the step with his whole face open and bright and said, "I'll start on it Monday." She laughed, and he laughed with her, and the sound of it rose over the cabin and into the evening air where it joined the sound of the creek and the wind in the pines, and the distant, unchanging voice of the mountains. The 4th child, another boy they would name Thomas in honor of the Shoshone man who had helped Anna teach the children truly, was born on a cold morning in February of 1881, fat and loud, and entirely himself from the first breath. Boone delivered him at home in the pre-dawn hours when Ruth Graves could not get through the snow in time, steady and calm through the whole of it in the way that Anna had stopped being surprised by, because the man she had married was steady and calm through everything the world produced, not because nothing touched him, but because he had decided what to stand on and he stood on it and did not move. She looked up at him afterward with the baby new in her arms and said, "You are remarkable, Boone Maddox." "I've been told that before," he said. "By me," she said, "twice. Both times I believed you," he said. The snow outside was deep and the fire was good and the cabin held them all, the 4 children and the 2 people who had found each other in the improbable, specific, magnificent way that good things are sometimes found through an act of faith. A letter answered, a schoolhouse built, a silence made comfortable by the presence of someone who understood it completely. Outside the window the mountains were white and immense and timeless, and inside the cabin Anna Maddox held her 4th child and knew, with a completeness that required no qualification, that the letter she had read at her kitchen table in Cincinnati in the spring of 1874 was the best thing that had ever happened to her, and that the man who had built her a schoolhouse was the home she had not known she was traveling toward. Coulter's Creek grew through the years, more families arriving, a proper hotel built beside the saloon, a doctor who came and stayed, a second church for the population that had grown too large for one. The schoolhouse received its third edition in 1882, and Anna, 40 years old now, her copper hair developing its first threads of silver, her posture still straight and her walk still quick, her eyes still bright with the particular light of a person who is genuinely interested in the world, continued to teach with the same quality of attention she had brought on the first Thursday morning, when she had asked 31 children about the name of the river that ran closest to the town. Boone still went to the mountains. He would always go to the mountains, but he came home. He came home to a cabin that smelled like bread and wood smoke, and the particular lively noise of 4 children between the ages of 2 and 11. He came home to Anna at the end of every trip, and she was always there at the front step when she heard his horse on the path, not because she had been waiting anxiously, but because she liked to see him arrive, liked the particular way he looked coming down through the pines with the last of the light behind him, solid and sure and entirely himself. He would unsaddle the horse and turn it into the corral and come to where she stood and kiss her in the unhurried way of a man who knows he is home, and she would put her hand flat against his chest in the way she had done since the first winter evening in Mrs. Holt's parlor and feel the steadiness of him. "How were the mountains?" she would ask. And he would tell her in the quiet, particular way that he told her things, the deer he had tracked, the weather he had read, the eagle's nest on the north ridge that had been there 3 years running now, and she would listen with her whole self, and afterward they would go inside to the noise and the light and the children and the life they had built from a letter and a cleared sight and a measuring rope and 31 children who had needed a schoolhouse. It was, in every way that mattered, more than enough. It was everything. Eli came back from his expedition that summer, brown from the sun, and carrying a journal filled with observations that he had already begun preparing for publication, the professor having told him the material was genuinely original. He came back to Coulter's Creek the way he had said he would. It was his home, had always been his home, and he brought with him a quiet, dark-haired young woman named Ruth, whom he introduced with a careful dignity as his friend, and who sat at Anna's table and asked intelligent questions about the school, and looked at Eli when she thought no one was watching in a way that Anna recognized completely. She and Boone exchanged a look across the supper table, the kind of look that requires no words because it is built from years of the same language, and Boone's mouth did the small, certain thing it did, and Anna pressed her lips together to keep from smiling and poured more coffee for everyone and let the evening go on. The valley held them all, the mountains steady above, the creek running clear through summer and iced over in winter and running again in spring, the schoolhouse full and bright, and full of the sound of children learning things about the world they lived in. And in the cabin on the hillside, in the evenings when the children were in bed and the fire was low and the mountains were dark outside the window, Anna Mercer sat beside the man who had built her a schoolhouse and was aware, in the deep and settled way of someone who knows exactly where they are, that she had found the right place, the right life, and the right person. The mountains looked on, as they had before any of them arrived and would after all of them were gone, carrying their snow and their silence and their vast, unhurried permanence. But tonight, as on 100 nights before and 100 nights to come, the light in the cabin window was warm against the dark, and inside it, Anna and Boone Maddox were home.